I'm Dory.
I'm Nemo.
Nemo? That's a nice name.
Hello guys and welcome to another Rewind review. In this video we're going to be taking a look at one of my absolute childhood favourites, and that is Pixar's Finding Nemo. The 2003 animated movie is directed by Andrew Stanton and Lee Unkrich and co-written by Andrew Stanton, Bob Peterson and David Reynolds. After his son is captured in the Great Barrier Reef and taken to Sydney, a timid clownfish sets out on a journey to bring him home. The movie features the voice talent of Albert Brooks, Ellen DeGeneres, Alexander Gould, Willem Dafoe, Brad Garrett, Alison Janney, Austin Pendleton, Stephen Root, Vicky Lewis, Joe Ranft, Jeffrey Rush, Andrew Stanton, Elizabeth Perkins, Nicholas Bird, Bob Peterson, Barry Humphries, Eric Bana, Bruce Spence, Bill Hunter, Lulu Ebling, Jordan Ranft, Erica Beck, Eric Persullivan and John Ratzenberger. This movie is an absolute classic. It was one of my absolute favourites growing up. And not only that, this was actually one of the big cinema trips that me and my family had, and it was a really great experience. This one definitely does hold a special place for me among all of Pixar's different animated movies that they've produced over the years. I won't go so far as to say that this is my favourite Pixar movie, but this is definitely one of the best that Pixar has made. The story for this one is definitely kept as simple as it can be. It definitely has been done before, but the way that this movie goes about telling that story, it does feel very unique enough to feel fresh. And when it comes to a lot of Pixar's other movies, it does follow the same basic structure that a lot of their movies do tend to take, which normally revolves around a duo going on a road trip and getting into various scrapes along the way. But I don't feel like that's actually a negative for this movie, and it does actually work very well for the story that they are trying to tell. A large part of the reason for that is because of the characters. There are some really great characters, very memorable characters that are introduced in this movie. And the voice talent behind every single character, like every Pixar movie that has ever been made, they are absolutely perfectly cast. Some of the actors on this movie, like Ellen DeGeneres, Willem Dafoe, Brad Garrett, very recognisable voice, and you will pick out that they are the ones playing those characters. But then there's others like Jeffrey Rush and Eric Bana, who, I will be completely honest, I didn't even realise that was even them voicing these characters. I was quite surprised reading the cast listings for this movie and seeing their names. In fairness, the reason why I probably didn't pick up on Jeffrey Rush's voice being a part of this movie is because I'm just so used to him playing Barbossa in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that I've just never really heard his normal voice. But the voice talent overall is genuinely amazing. Every single person that they have cast and what it is that they bring to each of their roles and the way that they play those roles is genuinely incredible. It's so easy for some animated movies to get the casting just so completely wrong, but this one absolutely nails every single character, and it definitely helps that nobody is really shoehorning in their performance as well. Everyone is genuinely giving their all to this. There are a lot of characters in this movie, and each one does have a little quirk. It does separate them and make them memorable, and I feel like one thing that does kind of aid that a little bit is the fact that the story kind of splits off in two different directions. The first one's focusing on Marlin and Dory going on the search and going across the ocean to try and find Nemo, and the second revolves around Nemo along with these other very eccentric fish who've been cooped up in this fish tank for too long trying to escape. And in a lot of instances when you do have movies that do that, where they split the story up into two different directions or even more than that, it can get to a point where it can feel a little bit boring or might not feel as investing when it comes to one particular story or another. But when it comes to this one, I genuinely feel like both stories are both equally great and both have just the right amount of screen time, and it really helps that the overall arcs that these characters are going on doesn't really feel wasted either, because both Marlin and Nemo have a number of different experiences that help change their characters. Because Marlin has been through a very traumatic experience, and quite understandably he does get very protective of his son, but he's just a little bit too protective to the point where he doesn't really want Nemo to kind of just go off and do his own thing, and he's really sheltered him all his life, which has had a bit of a negative impact on Nemo, who does feel a little bit more reliant on Marlin to the point where he actually gets into a few scrapes himself, and the first instinct that he has is to just scream for his dad. So I like seeing that over the course of the movie you do have Marlin who learns to give Nemo a bit more space to actually hold off from being too overprotective, and then Nemo finding a way of becoming a bit more independent. It's really well done. I think that all the characters that they encounter along the way really do help build those characters up across that time. That's why it actually does work, this story, very well. Because a lot of movies that do have those kind of encounters along the way where they sort of like run into different characters who all have little things to do and say and songs and all sorts, they can ultimately sometimes feel a little bit pointless, and it's just kind of there as a bit of a distraction and just sort of pan the runtime out a little bit more. But one thing that they do in this one is they make sure that every experience experience that the characters do have, all the characters they interact with do have an impact on them. When it comes to Marlin, one of the characters that has the biggest impact on him is a character called Dory. Dory is a blue tangfish who has short-term memory loss, which is a really fun idea, and it does add some really good drama and comedy. It is definitely played up more for laughs, but it does hint at some more heartbreaking elements that the divisive sequel does dive into. I will admit it definitely can be a little convenient when it does become a problem and when it doesn't, like when she can remember an address with no problem whatsoever, but she can't ever seem to get Nemo's name right. But I do understand what it is that they are trying to do, especially towards the end, and I do like that. She's easily one of my favourite characters in this movie. I think that she is one of the very few comedy characters that actually does work very well. Because yeah, on the one hand she is there just to get a few laughs and to lighten the mood a little bit, and she does do that, but at the same time she does have a proper important part to play within the overall story, to the point where she actually does help Marlin along his way. And then when it comes to Marlin's character arc, she is definitely an important part in that evolution that he goes through in this film. The friendship that is built up between them across the movie is genuinely really good. I do love a lot of their dialogue. It does feel very believable, and that's one of the things I really do love about the performances, because they really do bounce off each other and you can tell that there is chemistry there. It does help sell this as a lot more believable, and you really do warm up to these characters a lot more. And that does go for every other character in this, because every single character does have a really good relationship with the people that are around them, and there is some really good banter and a lot of comedy in this. When it comes to the comedy genuinely is quite funny in this movie, and I think that it is balanced out very well with a lot of the more serious and dramatic stuff. That's one of the things that Pixar does tend to do really well, and I do think this is probably one of the funnier ones that they have done. As I said, Dory definitely does provide a lot of the laughs, but when we have a lot of the other characters that are introduced a little bit later on, like the sharks, who are basically going through like a recovery group where they're trying not to eat fish anymore. I've always wondered if the people over at DreamWorks saw this movie before they made Shark Tale, but by far the funniest thing in this movie, and it might probably be the funniest thing that Pixar has ever made, the seagulls. It is absolutely played up for laughs, but my god is it accurate. I absolutely hate seagulls, and believe me, the way that they are depicted in this movie is very accurate. I'm going to be honest, when it comes to a lot of the accuracy in this movie and the way that a lot of the characters are depicted, because they are based on real life creatures, all the creatures that do appear in this movie do exist. They are brought to life in a very, very realistic way. A lot of the movements that these characters do have is very realistic. I know they did do a lot of background research and a lot of studying of marine life to really get the movements and the characteristics of these creatures right. I think it really does add to the experience of this movie, because they are really well done. The animation in this movie is absolutely incredible, and one of the things that I really do like is that they are able to balance both the more realistic stuff and the more cartoony elements, because that's one of the things that animation really does allow you to do. You can have these more realistic stuff, like just the way that the characters move and the way that they swim around, but then they also do some really cartoony over the stuff things and lots of big emotional expressions and all sorts that you can only really do in a cartoon. I feel like it is a really good balance, and I think that it's not really something you can do in live action, and that absolutely is one of the reasons why I don't like the Disney live action remakes. It is an absolutely beautiful movie. There is so much detail in this film. There's so much just going on in the backgrounds, the way that the colours are used, or the lighting, the effects, the way that all the fish, there's always something going on in any scene. I like how it does kind of give the impression of being underwater, that there is a lot of really good effects that they do add into this to really help sell that as much as they can, because there is like a bit of a blurriness to it, and it really sort of like brings out the colours a little bit more. It makes them seem a little bit more brighter than they actually would normally be. And then the way that they incorporate one specific thing that you do need to have when it comes to anything that takes place underwater, and it's just something so simple that it's probably not even going to be something that you'd even really think of. And that's how they use these little particles that always appear on screen every time there's a scene that takes place underwater, especially when it comes to like a big movie like this. You need to have those little particles floating around just to kind of sell it just a little bit more. It helps sell that you are in this environment, and it really does give the illusion of a bit more of a 3D effect, because otherwise it just makes the characters look like they're just kind of floating. But it is a really great representation of being underwater, and I do think that when it comes to a lot of Pixar's movies and a lot of animated movies that have been coming out over the years, especially 3D animation, I feel like this was definitely a big jump when it came to underwater stuff. And it's not just necessarily the underwater stuff either, it's when like the characters go up to the surface and when you see people actually on the surface, and the way that the reflections are and the shadows and the way that the waves are and the movements and everything, raindrops hitting it, it's absolutely beautiful. It's really well done. It is absolutely incredible. It doesn't need to look as realistic as a lot of their new movies tend to do, but I do think that it does work very well for the world that they have gone for within this movie. And speaking of the 3D illusion, I do think that one thing that Pixar did add into this movie that I'm not sure if they really did it in any of their previous movies prior to this one, is they did kind of focus a little bit more on the focal length and the way that the camera sort of focuses on things in the foreground and blurs everything out in the background. It is a very subtle thing to add into this movie, and I do think that it does kind of help enhance it a little bit more, because it really does help add to the scale of the environment that they are in. I could be wrong on this about them probably using it for the first time here, but I do think that this is probably one of the first times where it's been a little bit more noticeable, and I do think that it does add a lot to this movie, and it is a big benefit to what it is that they are trying to do. And one thing that really does help sell the immersion of this movie a little bit more is the sound design, because it is absolutely incredible. It's one of the things that really does add to the sense of scale in this movie, and it really does help fill in the blanks when it comes to the environment, because it always feels like there's always something going on in the background, because you can always hear something. It's not completely overbearing, because a lot of movies that do take place underwater, or a lot of movies that do have sequences that take place underwater, do have a very specific sound effect that they always use. And it is there, definitely, but it's not really that noticeable, because they do tone it down as much as they can. In fact, there's a lot of sequences where they don't even use it. But to help sell the underwater feel a little bit more, it is every time that character moves, does anything, there's always a little bit of a splashing sound effect. No matter what happens, there's always some sort of splash effect whenever somebody moves. It is genuinely really great, and if you do get the chance to actually listen to it with surround sound, I'd highly recommend it. Especially the scene where they're inside the whale's mouth, where they end up encountering the anglerfish. God, that thing is terrifying. That is one thing that I do want to mention for this movie. It is a very fast-paced movie. It does have a lot of very lively sequences, but it does know when to slow it down. It does know when to be a bit more heartfelt and a bit more emotional. But when it comes to a lot of the more livelier sequences, some of these scenes are genuinely quite intense. Considering this is a movie that is definitely geared more towards kids, it is considered a kids movie, but I think that some of these sequences are really intense for little kids. I'm speaking from experience here, and as I said, I went to see this in the cinema and I was very young when this movie came out. Some of these sequences are a lot. There's a lot of chase sequences in this movie, and they are really intense. There is a genuine sense of threat from a lot of the creatures that they are going up against and they are trying to evade. The scene involving Bruce the shark is definitely a little bit more funnier than some of the other ones, but the actual chase itself is genuinely quite full on. The same can be said for the anglerfish sequence, because that is a very well executed sequence. Almost sort of feels almost like a horror in a way. It does have that sort of vibe to it, but it is still kept comedic as much as they can. But like the way that the lighting is for it especially, it's incredible how it's done. I'll even say that the scene where Nemo gets abducted by the divers almost kind of comes across a bit like a horror movie in a way. These big gigantic creatures looming over them, the sound design just really amps up, the music really builds up into something quite intense and scary. It is really well executed, and that's one of the times where I will say that the voice acting really does help benefit that, because it does feel very real, and their fear, their dread really is sold, and it is really good. I do really love the Jellyfish Field sequence as well, because I like how that really sort of rises the tension a little bit more, how it's a slow build up across this sequence, because it starts off quite playful and quite fun, but there is definitely a sense of danger there, but it does still maintain a sense of fun. But then the increasing danger as that sequence plays out is really good. It's very well handled. And it even goes for all the stuff involving Darla as well. The dentist who abducted Nemo is planning on giving Nemo as a present to Darla, and we see that she has actually had fish in the past, and she has actually killed them just by shaking the bag that they're in. So there is a race against the time element that is added into this. It isn't just a case of Nemo has been taken and not Marlin has to go and find him, and that's all it is. There is a genuine sense of urgency, and when it all does kick off and Darla is introduced into the movie, and how that sequence plays out, including the little psycho music that they play in the background every time she's on screen, it is really good. And I say that the sequence itself is expertly done. The tension is there. You do not know how it is going to unfold, but it is so good. It is a really great movie. And as I said, when it comes to the comedy, it is used to help sort of break the tension a little bit. It is used to lighten things up a little bit more, help us be a bit more enjoyable for younger people who might be finding it a little bit too intense. But it doesn't distract from the danger of that moment or the more emotional stuff as well. It is a very good balance of tones that they have gone for, and it is very good overall. And then when it comes to the soundtrack, I think that the score that Thomas Newman has created is one of the most beautiful ones that Pixar has ever had. It's a very memorable theme overall, and I do think that the mix of music that they have integrated into this is really good. I also think how it's used used and how a lot of the themes are used throughout the movie is very good, and it's very clever as well with the way that it does get you to associate bits of music with emotions or characters. And I think that how that is used throughout the movie, it really does help sell more emotional things, but it helps get you a bit more emotional as well. It isn't trying to be subtle and unnoticeable and just sort of there, just sort of try and enhance the scenes a little bit more. It is definitely a lot bigger and it is a lot more memorable because of it. It is a really great soundtrack overall. I will admit that the music does play a big part in my nostalgia for this movie, because I do remember those themes very well, to the point where as soon as that opening theme starts playing, the opening titles, I really started welling up hearing it. I don't know what it is about that theme that does have that effect on me, because I actually went to a concert a few years ago. It was like a Pixar themed concert where they went through the music of all different films. Highly recommend it if you get a chance to check it out. And then the theme for this movie started playing and I just started tearing up, and I just don't know why it's able to do that to me. But it is a genuinely incredible score, and I think that this is definitely one of the most memorable scores that a Pixar movie does have. Just before going to my overall thoughts for this movie, one of the things that I do want to very quickly mention is a lot of the little Easter eggs and references that Pixar do have a habit of sprinkling in a lot of their movies, because this movie does have quite a few big ones that are very prominent in the movie. There's some more subtle ones as well that you probably don't notice, but I do like how they are used in this movie, and they do sort of help sort of fill out the world a little bit more. Most of this stuff appears around the dentist's office where Nemo is, and some of them are really quite funny. Like there's a scene where Nemo looks out across the waiting area and he actually sees a little Buzz Lightyear toy next to this toy box. There's a kid who comes into the office a little bit later on and he's reading a comic book, and if you have a look on the front cover you can actually see that it's for Mr. Incredible, because that's one thing that Pixar does have a habit of doing. They tease the next movie coming out, like there's a little reference towards the next movie coming out. And The Incredibles was Pixar's movie of 2004, which was a year later after this one. Obviously you have the more obvious ones like the Pixar ball and the Pizza Planet truck whizzing past the dentist's office. But my favourite one's actually in the credits. Like one thing that you need to do whenever you watch an animated movie is just watch the credits, because there's always something going on in the background, just the characters doing stuff. And yeah, with this one you have the fish and all the characters doing their own little thing around the credits and sort of interacting with it and sort of waving to the audience. But then a little bit later on, towards the end of the credits, Mike Wazowski from Monsters Inc. makes a little appearance, and he's just in like a little scuba gear and he just like swims across the screen and like looks and waves at the camera and that's it. It's just fun little details that really do help add to the experience of this movie, and it is a really nice little thing to add into this. And I will admit very quickly that there is actually a post-credit scene in this movie, so I would recommend sticking around to see it. It's not an important scene, but I do think that it is a really fun little payoff to something that happened a little bit earlier on in the film. Overall, this is one of Pixar's best movies. It tells a genuinely heartfelt and emotional story, but it keeps things lively with a bit of comedy and a lot of action, with some fantastic characters, some great music, and some of the most beautiful animation that Pixar has ever produced. It is a lively movie, it is fast paced. I do wonder if the movie could have been a tiny bit longer, but honestly I don't think that it really would have helped benefit this movie in any way. I think that this is a pretty perfect movie as it is, and it does know when to slow down when it is needed. It is the perfect family film, and I think everyone will enjoy it. Yes, it is definitely advertised and it is geared more towards younger audiences, and I think that yes, this is a must watch for kids. I think that they will highly enjoy it, but if you are a fan of Disney movies, if you are a fan of Pixar movies, if you are a parent and you do have kids, I think that you will enjoy this too. It is an absolutely fantastic movie, and I'll be honest, if you do get the chance to ever go and see this on the cinema, if any cinemas do reruns of it, I would highly recommend checking it out. Nitpicks aside, this is a fantastic movie overall, and that is why my rating for Finding Nemo is a 10 out of 10. This is an absolute classic, and honestly it is a must watch movie. If you've never seen this movie before, watch it. There is a really weird perception on animated movies, especially when it comes to people in Hollywood who just kind of view these movies as just something for kids and they don't really care. But these movies really do need the same amount of passion and creativity in order to make them. There has been some incredible animated movies that have been released over the years, and not every single one of them are geared towards kids. I definitely need to start reviewing more animated movies on this channel, so keep an eye out for more content like that in the future, and there's going to be a few big ones coming out next week. So that is pretty much everything that I'm going to say for this review, so thank you very much for watching. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that is going on here. If you have seen Finding Nemo, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like me to do, let me know down below. I am definitely going to be exploring more Pixar oriented movies in the future, so keep an eye out for those. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and remember, just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.